With all eyes on the presidential campaign, where should we look for the final answer? Today's guest is Democratic pollster John Anzalone, a veteran of 4 presidential campaigns, Harvard Kennedy Institute fellow, and an unabashed fan of the Crimson Tide, here to provide some of those answers in a race that's coming in for a very hot landing. From Ballard Studios in Washington, D.C., it's 13th and Park.
We give you information, not a panic attack.
I mean, look what's going on. I mean, my God.
This was it. The kids were gonna die.
That time is gone forever.
This is the biggest story in America.
We weren't prepared for this.
Don't you want to speak truth to power?
Toughest thing I ever had to do.
John, welcome to the show. You're going to be hearing John in stereo since it's John Anzalone and my partner, John Hamlin.
Listen, no one calls me John. They call me Anzalone or Anzo, so you can differentiate.
We can call you Anzalone for the, this is fantastic.
Yeah, the whole thing. Or Anzo. Like, I'm the only 60-year-old guy who has a nickname, in politics.
John, take it away.
You know, growing up, one of my favorite performers was James Brown, the hardest working man in show business. And it's such a treat to be with you, John Anzo, the hardest working man in Democratic politics. So thanks for taking the time.
That was a good opener, by the way, John.
Well, thanks. It's great to be back on the show with you, Adam. I thought you lost my number, but but anyway, hey, Anzo, let me ask you this. You worked on the Hillary campaign back in 2016, and you did the Biden campaign. And, one was a winner, one wasn't a winner. How did that impact your approach to polling? What did you learn from the Clinton campaign that you were able to apply to the winning Biden campaign?
Yeah, I mean, there was, after the Depression and alcohol, there was a lot, to learn and go back and kind of dissect. And we just had to understand that Trump just changed the dynamics of even how you poll, right? I mean, like, you had no idea who was coming out. And we learned that in 2020, that somehow you could actually have more people come out than in 2016. So he's kind of just upended how we approach things. And when we did kind of the autopsy on 2016, we realized that it wasn't just about not getting enough non-college educated voters in our samples. It was getting the right type of non-college educated voters, right? We were getting too many service-oriented non-college educated voters and not enough people who, like my old man who was a trucker, or people who work with their hands, or, manufacturing people, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we're moving to a service-oriented economy. And a lot of times, those service-oriented non-college educated voters, I mean, think of, someone who, I don't know, does administrative work in a dental office. They're acting a lot like suburban voters, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than, kind of service-oriented like my old man or your old man, et cetera. And so there was, without a doubt, work that we needed to do in terms of getting the correct type of interviews, right? Whether it was by education level or whether it was by, for example, when you're interviewing in rural areas, making sure you're not just getting that interview in the county seat, but you're actually getting it out in the boondocks. And so that was really important. But here's another thing that we learned, which was also how you analyze polls in this era, which was if you go and take the average of polls in every battleground state for Hillary Clinton, she got what she polled, and that was kind of new to us. And she had a problem at the very end when Comey came out on October 28th, and that changed the dynamics and made her as big a risk as him. And he did get a disproportionate number of undecided or swing voters at the end. So when I was analyzing in 2020 for the Biden campaign and Jen O'Malley and Mike Dunlin, those people, I never looked at the margin. It didn't matter that, Biden might be up by a point in North Carolina or Florida. You knew that him being stuck in the mid 40s, he wasn't going to win those states. And so we wanted to see Biden at 49, 50, 51, hence why we moved resources to Georgia. We always had Biden at 50% from July on. And he was stuck in mid 40s in North Carolina and Florida. And the campaign made a really smart resource allocation to move it to Georgia, where we won by 11,000 votes. If you look at the average of polls in every battleground state for Joe Biden in 2020, he got what he polled. And so we don't know whether that dynamic is going to hold in 24, right? In 2022, when you had the midterms, you always have the swing voters or the last undecideds break to the party that's not in power, right? In this case, it should have been Republicans. And for the first time since 1986, where did it break? It broke towards the Democrats, probably because of the extreme candidates on the Republican side for the U.S. Senate, those candidates who wanted to ban abortion, even in the case of rape and incest. We had never seen that before, right? And so every cycle, there seems to be curveballs about what's happening with the electorate. Some of it's polling error, and some of it's just the country is just so damn divided that you're in margin of error elections everywhere, whether it's the national election or these battleground states. And guess what? That small universe of voter at the end makes the decision one way or the other. I mean, there was a presidential election in 2016 where a candidate won the presidency by 75,000 votes in 3 states. 4 years later, a different guy wins the presidency by 45,000 votes in 3 states. And guess what? 2 of those states were different than the previous 4 years. I mean, it's fucking crazy, right? Trying to be a pollster right now. It's like, it's kind of nuts.
We're a fickle country, Anzo. What can I say? But let me ask you this. Talk about challenges, unique challenges. You now have Kamala Harris, who's the first woman of color to run for the presidency. That presents, it would seem, a lot of opportunities and potential challenges when it comes to polling.
No doubt about it. I think, it's kind of baked into the system, right? I mean, there's just certain biases that you're never going to be able to pick up in polling. That's just the bottom line. I mean, I think that we've gotten past, for example, the biases on Trump. People are more than happy to say that they're voting for Trump. We've changed the way we collect interviews. For example, there's just people who will not take a live interview, right, by a live voter. And so we get those hard to reach voters by doing some of our interviews by text to web. We often see that those interviews are just a little bit more conservative, even with people of color, for example. I think one thing that you are certain of is that she has absolutely changed the dynamics of the race at a historic level. And I think Democrats, when Joe Biden, and I'm a Joe Biden guy, like I started working for him as a field organizer in February of 1987 in Iowa in his first presidential campaign.
Wow.
I am true Joe Biden. But when he stepped aside, there was literally a defibrillator to the Democratic community, right? In 2 stints. And we got up and played golf on Thursday. I mean, it was like fired up to be back in the game. And she met the moment and she rode the wave. And so the changes in voting for on average, Trump was, ahead by +4 and she's probably ahead by +2 now. To have a 6-point change in a very short period of time is not something that we've seen. People are giving her a different type of look than I think anyone would have ever expected.
We hear a lot of talk about the swing states in this election. We got the blue wall, we got Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, we've got North Carolina, Georgia, sweep over to Nevada and Arizona. And there's a very small sliver of votes, really, that's going to decide which way those states are going. What is the persuadable voter looking for, and what is the best way to reach them in those states?
Well, Johnny, I would think of it a couple different ways. One is you do have a small universe of voter that are persuadable. They're undecided. They have a certain angst in life, right? About, they think that this guy might be able to help me in my personal finances and he's better on the economy, but I'm just not sure that I can deal with him for 4 more years. That universe tends to be under 50 in age, rabidly independent, self-identified independents, non-college educated, and disproportionately female. A group that's not normally a great universe for Democrats, but one that we see both in polling and in focus groups who are completely open to Kamala Harris and are giving her a really serious look. The other part of it, which is really important, is that enthusiasm of Harris voters are now higher than enthusiasm for Trump voters. We never thought we'd ever see this, right? But it's real. Matter of fact, Institute of Politics came out with their newest youth poll. And all of a sudden, young voters 18 to 29, she's finally hit that threshold of over 60%, right? But their enthusiasm definitely will vote is now higher than Trump voters. And so what that means is not just that sliver of swing voters, but which campaign is going to expand their vote. I think that we are on pace for the first time in a long time, literally since Obama, to expand the universe of voter that we can get. And the question is, can Trump do that? We never thought he could get more voters out than 16, and he did in 2020.
Right.
So is there more juice to be squeezed? Can he do it in reaction to the threat that Kamala Harris poses? If there's anyone out there who can tell you what the electorate's going to look like on Election Day 2024, forget it. They're full of shit.
What do you think the down ballot implications are in 24? Because in 22, it had its own kind of mojo. And you already talked about reproductive rights and the quality of candidates being major factors. I think in Democrats actually doing well in the midterms. What about 24, especially when you look at races like McCormick versus Casey in Pennsylvania?
Well, this could be the storyline other than the who wins the presidency, right? This could be the storyline of the election for us nerds, for our political nerds, which is ticket splitting back?
Right.
Because I think it's gotten down to something like 2.6%, which is super low historically. But then let's dissect this. We do polling with Tony Fabrizio at Fabrizio Ward. He's Trump's pollster. We do every battleground state for AARP, and some of them we do twice. And the fact is that the delta, the difference between the presidential campaign and the Senate campaign has sometimes been double digits. We've never seen that. By the time that this is aired, we're going to have the North Carolina poll out where it's going to show Trump up, I think 3 in the multi and 2 in the head-to-head, and Stein up 10. And this is before Mark Robinson's scandal. A 13-point delta with almost 6% of the electorate voting for both Trump and Stein. That's double the amount of ticket splitters that we saw in 2020. If you take a look at Gallego in Arizona, who's been up substantially, and Trump's been up. Again, if you take a look in Nevada, Rosen has been incredibly exceeding expectations. Way back when Biden was in, we had Trump up 7 and her up 5, a 12-point delta. So again, you're seeing this just about everywhere. And I think it's going to be a really important storyline. It may not save the Senate, but what it probably will do is make the House narrowly Democratic now that she's gotten in and has brought back the base.
Okay, well, we had the first prediction, right? House goes narrowly Democratic. We're going to hold you to
but I mean,
this.
We may be able to count it on these hands. And I think that the power of Kamala Harris moving African Americans, Hispanics, young people, all by double digits in terms of the base consolidation, and women by, single digits, but moving them is substantial. Because if you're a member of Congress and you're running, or you're just a candidate running for Congress as a Democrat, you're much more impacted by the national political environment. So when you had Biden down 4 versus she up 2 or 3, that really is going to impact the congressional races. But Senate races tend to be their own, Senate races are $100 million endeavors now. So they tend to have their own identity, their own dynamics.
John, in 2016, we had Hillary Clinton, who was clearly an establishment candidate. We had Donald Trump, who was clearly not an establishment candidate. In 2020, Donald Trump tried to run again as not being part of the establishment. Joe Biden was clearly part of the establishment. He'd been around for a long time. This time, is Donald Trump part of the establishment in this race? And is Vice President Harris part of the establishment?
Yeah, so I think that people are looking past that. And I think that they're seeing Kamala Harris as part of the future and Trump as part of the past. I really think that that's what this is. It may not make sense because she's vice president, but she's change, right? And he's status quo. The difference is, and people can do mental gymnastics, right? Voters do it all the time, is his status quo is the economy back when he was president. And they perceive it as better. They perceive it as them doing better financially. And again, that is their tension here, because they also know on things like personal freedoms, reproductive rights, the threats to democracy, they're very uncomfortable with his positions on that. But they still think that he has some magic fairy dust on the economy. And this is their battle. They know that she's the future. They're getting to feel more and more that she's for the people. And we haven't had that feeling in a long time for Democrats, right? When you ask in a focus group, hey, what's the first word phrase that comes to mind when you think of Democrats? For the last 10 or 15 years, the Republicans have done tremendous branding. And it's all been about, you're about immigrants, you're about welfare workers, you're about, when I had someone in a tum would say Kaepernick. I mean, that to them, encapsulates Democrats. And so this future past change, she is really encapsulating that. And I think that's part of why she's been running ahead.
I think that what you're saying essentially, John, is there's a struggle between, let's talk about the vice president. She is selling a message of hope and future. A lot of people want to believe in that. right? We all want to hope that the future is going to be better, but they're just not sure she's the agent to bring it. She's calling herself, of course, a change agent, and we all understand why. But she's been a part of an administration that has a record now for 4 years, and that's the struggle I think that people are going through. Those are a focus, as you say, on the economy. I think that's where they're kind of not sure yet.
So let me challenge that a little bit because she has done, again, I can't explain the dynamics, but the fact is that her favorable rating has moved up 15 plus points. And so her favorable rating compared to Joe Biden is now dramatically different. And she now is more favorable than Trump. So people are looking at her not as her role as VP or as part of the administration. Voters are looking at her as a Democratic nominee for president. Those are two very important differences. Now, I've seen the Trump ads that, they're trying to tie her to Bidenomics, where she says, oh, Bidenomics is working, all that type of stuff. Listen, it potentially could be effective. Each side's going to spend $1 billion here in the next 6 weeks. But how people are viewing her is very different from how they're viewing the administration or independently of Joe Biden. And again, we're talking about a small universe of voter, and there's only a handful of states that matter.
Right.
Like this is about Michigan, Pennsylvania, and to me, Georgia, right? Because Michigan is 15 electoral votes, Georgia is 16. If you lose Michigan, you can pick that up. But the fact is that this doesn't really matter much what it means to the nation. It matters what it means to 7 battleground states.
You've done a lot in the corporate world for a lot of major corporations, and you talk about having to help them and trying to help them through quote unquote turbulent political environments. And it is turbulent out there for a corporate leader to know what to do or not to do, what to say and what not to say, as we become much more sensitive, I think, in this country to all of those things. What's your best advice to a CEO who says, okay, Anzo, how do I play this?
Yeah, I think that the best advice you can give is that corporations tend to react too quickly to a political environment or a political issue that is dominating the day. That, quite frankly, because of the fatigue of the American people, will not even be in their minds in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks. And so I think that corporate America often just gets over their skis too quickly, right? And the other thing that they don't do is they don't, in those times when there's a political issue, Roe gets overturned. Okay, do we comment on it, right? Whatever the issue may be. Clearly Disney is one of the better examples. And why I bring up Disney, I don't work for Disney. But what you also have to think about is maybe you better ask your employees and your customers, like go out there and poll them before you get too far over your skis on it. And you might find out, for example, that, you might wait a beat or two. Listen, there's really important issues for companies to take a stand on. Racial justice is one of them. We see that in the polling of customers and employees all the time. But you'll also find sometimes, I did a major study for a Fortune 500 company and found that their employees and customers were different in terms of how they viewed these things. And so go and get the pulse.
We know that you have a history in Michigan. You started with Kalamazoo, thought you would have been a Michigan football fan. As it turns out, you are big for the Crimson Tide. So I want to see what humility looks like on you, Anzo, when I remind you of this clip.
Okay.
That's Williams in motion. Low snap. Melrose stopped. Michigan makes a stand and comes up with a milestone playoff victory.
So I was there.
No.
And this is one of the times in life where being in that environment at the Rose Bowl, everyone should do it once.
Yeah.
I don't care if you have a team in the hunt. Being there was such an amazing experience. We hated to lose. And I was there with my college roommates, and they were Michigan fans.
Oh, yeah.
I'll tell you what also makes it okay. You hate losing, but I've got a hat with an 18 on it, and that's 18 national championships of the University of Alabama.
There we go.
And if we hadn't had any, even in the last decade, it would have made it a hell of a lot worse. But I was there with my 2 kids who, at the time, both going to the University of Alabama, my wife an Alabama grad. And it was an electric environment. It was overtime. And you knew right then you were watching the national championship.
Okay, so here's the $1 million question. How's it going to go this fall? U.S. Senate, the United States House of Representatives. We've already heard your opinion on that, and the presidency.
Yeah, it's going to be split. I mean, again, we've had 2 presidential elections that were really close. We're going to have a third. And now that Georgia has changed their law, Pennsylvania and Georgia and Arizona, I'm not sure when we're going to know who's president. In 2020, it took till Thursday for Pennsylvania to be called. Now that you have to hand count everything in Georgia, who the hell knows? Maricopa County takes forever to come in. And so, I think that Harris is going to win. I really feel that this is going to be close. I think that the combination of closest states are going to change again. I really do believe that. I think the House is going to just be single digits. And the challenge in the Senate, we know, which is we've lost West Virginia, makes it 50-50. The average of polls right now for Tester, who's a client of my firm's, he's down, 5 or 6. So that's a really tough one. You don't give up on it. It's going to be tough to hold on to the Senate. And I think that, everyone's probably agrees with that. But miracles do happen.
Well, John, I really appreciate your time. Appreciate how you didn't go for the bait with my partner on Alabama.
Yeah.
You wanted to see if there's any wiggle with you. There was not. That was good to see.
No.
Good luck to you. Obviously, a lot of America is focused on what's going to happen over the next 40 plus days. And they're extremely focused on what you and others in your profession are doing as we see what could be the roadmap to our future. You take care of yourself.
Thanks, Anzo.
Great.
You're terrific.
Thanks, brother.